Most nights go by slow. Not much business up in the mountains. Most of the guys that do come in are either driving from one national park to another or staying at a cabin they rented out for a week in the summer. The busiest night we've had since New Year's was last Saturday, and if not for Ed, my manger, it would have most likely been the last night I ever spent here. Later events will explain why, but I don't really remember coming in to work that night. I have hazy flashes of conversations with the bartenders and Ed explaining to me my job for the night. "All right, Rob, tonight we are playing a game with the customers. All night the bartenders will be serving a round of a certain coloured drink, and everyone at the counter will line up and try the drink. When the drink gets to the end of the line, the last person will place the drink behind the bar, and then we will restart the line with a new drink of a different colour." Ed explained it to me in his usual manic sort of way. This, as you can guess, was not the first of his weird sort of games, or at least I assume it wasn't. I couldn't name you a past instance of something like this happening. All I know is that as Ed explained the game to me, it did not come across to me as foreign or out of the usual. "So, what do you need me to do tonight?" I asked, expecting Ed to throw me behind the bar for the night, or at least cleaning tables, but the response I received placed me in neither position. "Oh no, Rob. Tonight I need you to help me keep this game going. I am going to order the drink for the night, taste the drink first, then hand it to you. Once you try the drink, you have to give me a review. Then I will give the review to the bartenders as the drink makes its way down the line." Now, explaining my job for the night in writing, I find that it has the same hazy feeling in my memory as the games itself. I can't recall any other instances of having a job in one of these games, but when I was asked to participate, I do not remember even needing to ask about it. What he asked me to do just felt right, like it was what I was meant to do. My purpose was to give that review no matter what. From there, I do not remember the first few rounds of the game. All I remember was watching a green margarita with half a lime floating in the liquid, getting passed around at least 10 times in a row, then a glass of just plain water going around between rounds of other colours. It had to have been on at least round 15 of this game that my memory begins to clear and the events of the night begin to line up in order in my mind. The round went as follows. "All right, Susie, we need a new colour." Ed said, "We can try purple." Susie said, "No, we have already done purple. We need something new." Ed responded. I distinctly remember that purple had in fact not been made yet. By that round we had done red, green, blue, pink, and clear. Or at least I was told by the guy next to me. "How about brown?" A guy from the middle of the line yelled with a freakish amount of humour and glee in his voice. "Yes, that's it. We need a brown." Ed rejoiced to Susie as she furiously began rummaging behind the bar for a mix of drinks that would make a brown colour. In no time at all, the game continued on with its regular rhythm of planned lines that each of us adopted as our specific line that we said about the drink, no matter how good or bad it was. Ed took the glass from Susie and said his usual "Bum" as he presented the drink to the line of men along the bar top. We all rejoiced in our usual awe and amazement as Ed took a sip from the glass. "It's pretty fire," he said with his usual nod as he handed the drink to me. I took a moment to notice the state of his face before I grabbed the drink and looked into the glass. The drink looked like a milky Coca-Cola watered down with half-melted ice, with a large half of a smashed lime right in the centre. The drink looked like a green eyeball with veins branching into the surrounding fluid. Again, the odd look of the drink did not stop me from my usual line, and I straightened my face, took an inquisitive sip, swallowed, raised my eyebrows in surprise, and looked at Ed and said, "Shit's brown as fuck," with a large smile on my face, then handed the glass to the guy to my right as Ed gave the review to Susie. "Okay, Susie, the general consensus for this round is that shit's brown as fuck." As Ed repeated his usual speech, only different from the last round by colour of the drink, the line of men, Ed, Susie and myself, all burst into laughter in unison. The drink made its way down the line, different men doing their own self-appointed things with the drink, like taking a big swig, fake gagging, and then telling the guy next to him that it's the best thing he ever tasted, or sneaking an unreleased edition of the clear drink into the line to screw with Ed as he looked encouragingly down the line. Eventually the brown drink made its way to the end of the line and was slid behind the bar into what I can only imagine was a whole collection of different coloured drinks, sitting half empty from every person in line tasting each one. Now, the reason that round 15 stood out to me is because of the look on Ed's face as he handed me the drink for my review. When I looked up at him, his face seemed to distort from its usual shape. Ed normally has a shorter face, with ears that point out just a little more than normal, and a sharp chin with a scraggly short blonde beard that seemed to hang on his face like leaves on a dead tree. But when he looked at me on round 15, his face looked different. His pupils were dilated, like a cat in the dark. His blue irises, a thin ring separating the whites of his eyes from the black. He did not wear his usual grin, but rather just had an expecting smirk on his face. His ears almost seemed to stretch and grow, and his mouth bulged forward. I remember thinking to myself that he looked like an evil chimp. Of course, this did not register to me as weird as much as it registered to me as something I had been expecting all along, which is why it seems to stand out in my memory. It was a warning. As the night went on, we kept going. Round after round, drink after drink, colour after colour. Eventually, we ran out of colours and just started doing different versions of green and clear drinks. People in the line would disappear and reappear, or maybe just change order. On what must have been round 50, Ed stepped away and asked me to fill his position while he went to attend something, and for a few rounds of confusing amusement, we kept the game going. After what felt like hours, the line eventually all dissipated, except for Ed, myself, and one other man. By that point, I had been noticing a difficulty in my ability to breathe. Every breath was laboured and slow. I felt like I was taking in a long, deep breath, but what my body actually mustered out was a shallow breath of ordinary proportions. I also noticed that when I went to take a drink of the water bottle in my pocket, I would take a large gulp of water that filled my whole mouth, but when I pulled the bottle from my lips, it appeared as if I had only taken a small sip. Those effects, combined with a nagging pain in my stomach and a combination of lightheadedness and some alarming muscle spasms in my chest, drove me to tell Ed, I think I am done for the night. I need to go sit down." Ed looked at me with his chimpish smile and laughed. "Rob, you are sitting down." I looked down and found myself sitting on the same bar stool I had been sitting on all night. With that, panic began to set in, and my heartbeat began to ring in my ears. I realised that I no longer knew what was going on. A wave of self-awareness hit me as my stomach began to turn and nausea began to overtake me. I remember stumbling around the bar, struggling to breathe and not throw up. In a confusion, I went and sat down on a couch, then got up and went to play poker. Then, after convincing myself that I was, indeed, I'm so sorry," I pouted to myself as I stared at the flashing rainbow X's on the walls. A vision of myself sitting on the toilet, rocking back and forth, crying to myself, filled my mind, and an uncontrollable urge to laugh overtook me, and I began to chuckle. My breathing became a slow and gradual inhale, then an exhale broken up by sputtering puffs of air, caused by me trying to breathe and laugh at the same time. My head began to dance and move in diamond patterns as I noticed a noise coming from outside the bathroom door. A group of men laughing and talking among themselves. I could not make out what they were saying entirely. All I could make out was a systematic mention of the word green, followed by some mumbling, then another person saying the word clear. Almost as if stuck in a looping moment of time, the repeating mentions of green and clear, broken up by indistinguishable mumbling, filled my ears. I became convinced that I was frozen in time and began pacing back and forth, occasionally forgetting my nausea and breathing when I focused on the noise. When I focused on the others, I began to sit down and stand up, maybe look in the mirror. I would see myself standing and twitching, unable to sit still. After what felt like actual months with that routine, the mumbling stopped and the pain in my stomach subsided. It was such a sudden change in sensation. I stopped pacing and stood unblinkingly. I expected a sudden wave of relief to overcome me, but before it could, an intense anxiety began battering at the back of my head. There above the toilet was a face in the wall. It looked at me with hollow empty eyes, and a ghoulish scream distorting the paint of the wall. I froze in fear as I watched several new faces appear. My own deepest anxieties from the deepest corners of my brain, events I had long since forgotten, brought back up, like the ATV accident that killed my cousin when we were kids, the time I got lost in the shopping mall and my parents left me, and some teenager told me I'd die if I stayed there. Eventually, after hundreds of different thoughts flooded me from the mouths of the faces, one voice rang out louder than the others. "Rob!" It was my own voice. "Rob, it's not real," I yelled from the mouth of the ghost. "Rob, you need to get out of the bathroom," I continued yelling from the face on the wall. In my scared, confused state, I had no other choice but to listen. I broke from my paralysis and hastily opened the door to the bathroom. When I opened the door, it was as if I awoke from a dream. I was no longer at the bar. I was at a cabin in the mountains. That weekend had been my cousin's birthday, and I was there for his weekend-long party. There was no bar, there was no Susie or Ed, there was no Rob either. That wasn't even my own name. I walked out of the bathroom and down the hall to the large living room that everyone was gathered in. From the hall, I could hear a very loud and obviously funny conversation taking place. I could not make out all the words, but some familiar cues came out of the conversation. I could make out the occasional deliberate mentions of green and clear being used. It was at that moment that I lost all sense of what or how. Had they just been fucking with me? Was I or was I not working at a bar? How is it possible? Somehow I was confusing fake events with real ones. That realization scared me, as I realized that I could no longer trust my own memory, and I did not know why. As I concluded that my best hope of deciphering what had actually happened over the past few hours was to ask the group, I noticed a faint glow out the large window overlooking the dark forest of the midnight hours. There was a single, round figure looking at me with a familiar chimpish face. However, instead of the usual smirk or a grin, I saw Ed's face with an angry, unnatural scowl looking directly at me.